Zeno of Citium was born in Citium, a Phoenician colony on the island of Cyprus, sometime around 334 BCE. His family were merchants, serious, practical people whose world was built on trade routes and cargo manifests, not philosophical arguments. Citium exported copper and timber. The Phoenicians as a people exported something more valuable: the alphabet, the art of navigation, the purple dye extracted from murex snails that became so expensive only kings and emperors could afford it. Zeno grew up in this world of tangible things: weights, measures, prices, the smell of the sea. He understood commerce the way a philosopher understands argument, as a system of reliable relationships between cause and effect. He was good at it. By his late 20s, he was a merchant of some standing, traveling the Mediterranean with cargoes that made men wealthy. The cargo he carried on the voyage that would change his life was purple dye, Tyrian purple, the most expensive pigment in the ancient world. It took more than 10,000 murex snails to produce a single gram of the dye. A pound of purple-dyed wool cost more than most Athenian workers earned in a year. Roman senators had the purple stripe on their togas regulated by law, because too much purple was considered dangerously presumptuous. Zeno was sailing from Phoenicia toward Athens, carrying a hold full of this extraordinary substance. The weather turned. The ancient sources differ on where exactly it happened. Some say near Athens, some say off the Aegean coast, but they agree on the essential fact: the ship went down. The cargo was lost. Zeno survived, but only just, and with nothing. He made his way to Athens, the intellectual capital of the Mediterranean world, the city of Socrates and Plato, a place where a man without money was still a man with access to something valuable: ideas. Athens in 300 BCE was a city of professional thinkers. Philosophy was not yet an academic subject confined to universities. It was practiced in the open air, in public spaces, in the covered walkways called stoas that lined the agora. Philosophers of different schools argued with each other and with passers-by. Zeno, a foreigner who had just lost everything he owned, wandered through the city in a state that the Stoics would later call aporia, a condition of not knowing, of having had all your certainties removed. He had no ideology yet to replace what he had lost. He was, in the most literal sense, open. He entered a bookshop. This was not unusual. Athenian bookshops were social places where scrolls were read aloud and discussed. On the shelf was a copy of Xenophon's Memorabilia, a record of the conversations of Socrates, who had been dead for nearly a century, but whose reputation had only grown with time. Zeno read it. He then asked the bookseller, according to the ancient account, where he might find such a man as Socrates. The bookseller pointed to Crates of Thebes, a cynic philosopher who happened to be walking past at that moment. Crates was famous, difficult, deliberately provocative. He had given away a substantial inheritance to live on the street and practice philosophy, without the cushion of comfort. He was exactly the wrong kind of teacher for a Phoenician merchant who had just lost his wealth. He was exactly the right kind of teacher for a man who needed to understand what wealth actually was. Crates was a cynic, a follower of Diogenes, the philosopher famous for living in a barrel and telling Alexander the Great to get out of his sunlight. The cynics believed that virtue was the only thing worth having, that social convention was mostly nonsense, and that the philosopher's job was to demonstrate this by refusing to participate in the charade. Crates took Zeno as a student. The first lesson was practical. Crates handed him a pot of lentil soup and told him to carry it through Athens. When Zeno tried to hide the pot behind his cloak, embarrassed to be seen carrying food like a servant, Crates smashed it with his staff, covering Zeno in lentil soup in the middle of the city. "Why do you hide your soup?" Crates asked. "It's not harming you." The question was more interesting than it appeared. What exactly was Zeno ashamed of, and why? Zeno spent 20 years studying. He was not a man in a hurry. He worked through the Cynics, then the Academy, Plato's school, by then run by his successors, then the Megarian school, which specialized in logic and argument. He was building something, though he did not yet know exactly what. The problem with the Cynics was that they had nothing positive to offer. Their philosophy was largely defined by what it rejected. The problem with the Platonists was that they located the good in a transcendent realm of ideal forms, disconnected from practical human life. Zeno wanted something that could be lived, a philosophy that a merchant, a soldier, a slave, an emperor could actually use in the specific conditions of their specific days. He wanted the bones of Socrates without the mythology. He wanted virtue that could survive a shipwreck. Around 300 BCE, Zeno began teaching in the Stoicism, the painted porch, a covered colonnade on the north side of the Athenian agora decorated with famous murals depicting the battles of Marathon and Troy. He taught there because it was public and free. Anyone could walk in. Sailors, slaves, merchants, politicians, generals, they all walked through that porch. He taught standing up, without a fixed schedule, without tuition fees, without the institutional protection of an academy. His followers became known by where they gathered, the Stoics, the people of the porch. He taught that the universe was rational, that logos, reason, was the organizing principle of all things, and that human beings participated in this reason through their capacity for judgment. This was the foundation of everything that would follow. The core of what Zeno taught was a distinction the Stoics would refine over the following centuries, the difference between what is up to us and what is not. What is up to us, our judgments, our intentions, our responses, our character, is the only domain in which virtue is possible and in which we are genuinely free. What is not up to us, wealth, reputation, health, the behavior of other people, the weather on the day of our voyage, these are what the Stoics called preferred indifference. They are nice to have, but they are not necessary for the good life. A man can lose his cargo to a storm and remain entirely virtuous. A man can gain an empire and be entirely enslaved to his fears. This was not a counsel of passivity. It was a precise map of where human freedom actually lived. Zeno lived this philosophy rather than merely teaching it. The ancient sources describe him as remarkably consistent in character, patient, direct, abstemious by choice rather than necessity. He ate black bread and honey and figs. He slept on a simple mat. He was noted for walking away from conversations that were wasting time rather than enduring them out of social obligation. He was not performing asceticism. He simply did not find that more food or more comfort produced more good thinking. This was itself a kind of demonstration. The man who had lost a fortune in a shipwreck and then spent 20 years building a philosophy did not seem to feel that the fortune had been the important thing. What the shipwreck had taken turned out to be exactly the things he needed to stop carrying. The philosophy Zeno founded spread rapidly through the Hellenistic and then the Roman world in ways he did not live to see. Chrysippus would systematize it. Panidius would bring it to Rome. Cicero would write about it. Epictetus, a former slave, would teach it in Nicopolis to students who then taught it further. Seneca would use it to survive the court of Nero. And Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who may be the most famous Stoic of all, would write his private meditations in a military camp on the Danube frontier, reminding himself each morning of the same core idea that Zeno had taught in the painted porch 4 centuries earlier, that what happens to you is not in your control, and that how you respond to it entirely is. A Phoenician merchant's shipwreck had seeded all of this. Zeno died around 262 BCE, in his 70s or possibly much older. The ancient sources are uncertain. The story of his death is unusual enough that it may be apocryphal, but the Stoics preserved it. Leaving his school one afternoon, he tripped and broke his toe. He stood, looked at the ground, and said, I come, why do you call me? He then held his breath until he died. Whether or not the story is literally true, it captures something the Stoics wanted to say about him, that a man who had spent his life learning that external events did not control his inner life might, at the moment of death, choose to treat even dying as something up to him. His city gave him a gold crown and the honor of being buried at public expense, with an inscription praising his integrity. The shipwreck that began Zeno's philosophy was not a metaphor. It was a real ship that went down in real water, carrying real purple dye that would never dye anyone's toga. But what it demonstrates, and what Zeno spent the rest of his long life working out, is that the categories we use to understand loss are almost always too shallow. We account for what is gone and forget to account for what the going revealed. Zeno lost merchandise and found, in a bookshop in a foreign city, the question that would occupy him for 50 years, what is the good life, and does it depend on anything that can be taken away by weather? His answer, carefully built, rigorously tested, and passed forward through 23 centuries, was no. It does not. That answer is still available. The porch is still open.